Chapter 8. Waiting. The pleasantest place in the Black Castle, or rather the least depressing, was a little stone ledge outside the head jailer's window. It wasn't a proper window sill, it couldn't have taken a flower pot, but it was wide enough for a mouse to sit on in the fresh air. Every afternoon before setting out on his rounds, the head jailer used to raise the sash a couple of inches. His was the only window in the castle without bars, and as soon as his back was turned, Nils and Bernard and Miss Bianca used to run up and sit outside. It was really quite nice, though one of them had to always keep watch for the head jailer's return. He closed the window again immediately. Like most wicked people, he hated fresh air. This was the only airing his room ever got. So the three mice had to be careful to regain their hole in time. Otherwise, they would have had to make a long, dangerous journey round by a corridor window and back through the sitting room door. Nils and Bernard took turns watching. They took fair turns at everything, while the others looked at the view. In time, it grew very, very familiar. Far below ran the great river, sometimes angry, sometimes smooth, and when it was smooth, huge rafts floated by, so stacked with logs they looked like floating wood piles. In the stern of each was built a sort of hut or shelter made of reeds for the raftmen to sleep in, and if there was a raft woman, a raft wife, aboard, there would be hens and hen coops as well, and most likely washing out. When it was rough, they evidently tied up somewhere along the banks, for then not a craft was to be seen, and when they reappeared, it was in bunches of 6 or 7 at a time. "Where can they all be going?" marveled Miss Bianca. "Why, to the towns, of course," said Nils, "with winter firing. Don't you use firewood in these parts?" "At the embassy, we used central heating," said Miss Bianca. Nils laughed loudly. "Ha, ha, 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 ha. And where do you suppose the heat comes from?" "You forget," said Bernard quickly, "that Miss Bianca has never had to occupy herself with housekeeping. In these parts, as you call them, ladies don't." Miss Bianca threw him a grateful look, but she was very anxious there should be no bickering. Tempers fray so easily when one is anxious and frustrated. "Nils can never get used to my incompetence," said she gently, "but it didn't stop him being very kind to me on shipboard." As a matter of fact, and to their great credit, their bickerings were very rare and never lasted more than a few moments. Just a touch of crossness now and again was inevitable, for they were frustrated and anxious indeed. The thought of the poor prisoner was never far from their minds, and yet their anxiety to be doing something for him was coupled with such a complete inability to think what. Bernard relieved himself a little by digs at Madam Chairwoman, not of course referring to Miss Bianca. Whenever Nils made his remark about crossing bridges, "I'd like to see Madam Chairwoman cross this one," Bernard would mutter bitterly. That absent figure became really quite a useful scapegoat. Very much, however, was due to Miss Bianca, whose perfect manners and unfailing savoir-faire would have soothed the tempers of tigers, which was all the more creditable to her, since she in one respect was having the worst of things. By day, the three mice could support each other's spirits. Bernard and Nils, sharing a room, could talk to each other at night too. Poor Miss Bianca was all alone. Quite often she got up and crept into the parlor, just to hear the sound of their voices, although the things they talked about weren't particularly cheerful. "I wouldn't last a week," she heard Nils mutter sleepily. Not in a dungeon, I wouldn't. I'd last a month, mumbled Bernard. I'd last 2 months. Nils evidently woke up. Bet you wouldn't. Bernard woke up too. Bet you I would. Bet you a double six of dominoes, said Nils. You'd be dead and gone, and carried out feet first inside 1 week. And I bet you, countered Bernard, 2 potatoes and a walnut, that I'd still be there to shout, up the Norwegians, as they shoveled you under, having still 1 month and 3 weeks to go. I take you, said Nils. And I take you, said Bernard. There was a slight pause. Who's to hold the stakes? Miss Bianca. Miss Bianca shuddered. But in the morning, neither Nils nor Bernard said a word about it, and with a mixture of relief and irritation, she concluded that they had just been playing a masculine game, like golf. She still envied them, and how she envied them even more when the thunderstorms began. Each year, it seemed, as winter approached, such unnatural storms buffeted the castle unceasingly. All too soon the pattern became familiar. First, an ominous stillness in the air, as though presaging snow. Not a sound in all the castle save the coughing of the jailers. Then a little stir of wind, the storm's outrider. Then the first lightning flash, and then crash! Instead of snow, the thunderbolts, banging like artillery fire against the castle walls. From watchtower to dungeons, the whole place shook, and Miss Bianca, in bed, put her head under her pillow. Or else she got up and sat in the parlor, and once at least met Bernard, coming to see if she was all right. Are you all right, Miss Bianca? Asked Bernard anxiously. Miss Bianca pulled herself together. Thunderstorms always have played havoc with my nerves, she apologized. Even under the boys' pillow, they used to set me quaking. Actually, I just came to see that the fire was out. Bernard kicked at the hearth and said yes, it was. At least there was no danger from fire. Then I'll go back to bed, said Miss Bianca bravely. She paused a moment, however, and heaved a little sigh. Oh, Bernard, she added wistfully, how long ago it seems, that night we first met, in my beautiful, safe, porcelain pagoda. 2. Indeed, it seemed long, and indeed it was long, from full summer until almost midwinter. First, there had been Miss Bianca's air trip to Norway, then the long voyage back, then the wagon journey, and now nearly 2 months in the Black Castle. And without achieving anything, that was the hardest to bear of all. If only something would happen, they began to think. Something did. They had been in the Black Castle exactly 2 months and a day when a most terrible event occurred. Bernard was sitting on the ledge alone. Miss Bianca had one of her headaches, and since they never left her by herself, Nils was staying indoors too. It was his turn. Bernard would have been the one gladly, but in any situation of danger it is always best to keep strictly to rules. Imagine his amazement, therefore, to wake from a light doze and see Nils coolly seated beside him. Don't worry, said Nils easily. Miss Bianca didn't want me, so I thought I'd join you for a breath of air. She can, be just a bit of a nuisance. Bernard was so horrified he nearly fell off the ledge. But suppose Mamluk comes in, he cried. Even if he does, began Nils. At that very moment, Mamluk appeared inside. Bernard dashed towards the window. Too late. In that very moment, an old sash cord irretrievably frayed, and down the window slammed. Looks like we'll have to take the long passage round, said Nils, still unperturbed. And what about Miss Bianca? Shouted Bernard. Alone in there with Mom Luke? She's only to keep safe in the hole, said Nils reasonably. Stands to reason she won't venture out. Bernard caught him by the scruff and shook him till his teeth rattled. You idiot, he shouted. You irresponsible idiot. Not venture out. Don't you know that Miss Bianca isn't afraid of cats? They stared at each other in horror. Come quick, gasped Bernard. We can do nothing here, and I couldn't bear, he sobbed, to watch. Chapter 9. Cat and Mouse. His fears were only too well founded. Scarcely had he and Nils rushed from the ledge when Miss Bianca innocently walked forth into the very jaws of death. And not because she didn't see Luke, because she did see him. She was feeling bored, her headache was better, and when she looked for Nils, he had gone. Miss Bianca didn't particularly mind. She wasn't frightened, but all by herself she felt bored. If only she'd a book to read. But she hadn't. The head jailer was practically illiterate. There was nothing to be borrowed from his shelves save one dog-eared pamphlet entitled Cut Your Own Corns, which Miss Bianca would have sooner died. Oh, ominous phrases. Then look at it. She was bored. She had nothing to read. Thus, when a shadow fell across the entrance to the hole, she naturally put her head out. About 3 feet away, big and black as a thundercloud, crouched Mamluk. This was the first time Miss Bianca had ever seen him, Nils and Bernard being so careful to keep her out of his way. But she recognized him immediately from their description and thought it a very unfair one. Indeed, Mamluk, except for Keller, was so like her old Persian friend, Miss Bianca was prejudiced in his favor at once. Nils and Bernard said he had a horrible leer. Miss Bianca thought it a rather nice smile. It will be remembered also that though Mameluk's tormenting of the prisoners by leaping into their dungeons was down in the minutes in black and white, Miss Bianca had never been able to credit it. Such was her misguided trust in feline chivalry. So she now looked out with no more than pleasurable excitement. As for Mamluk, his whiskers fairly twitched in anticipation. He'd suspected for weeks past that there was something of interest in that hole beside the stove. Now he promised himself a proper mouse tea, with a little game of cat and mouse first. If only his prey could be lured from the safety of the hole. Little lady, purred Mamluk suavely, won't you come out and play with me? Miss Bianca advanced to the very threshold. Are you calling me? She asked hopefully. Certainly I'm calling, purred Mamluk. I'm sure it's very nice of you, said Miss Bianca, and to Mamluk's surprise and joy tripped out into the room. I should have been delighted to make your acquaintance sooner, she added, but my friends are a little unsociable. How shall we play? Like this, grinned Mamluk. He flashed out a great black paw and touched her on the nape. Only a little more force and he would have broken her back, as he intended to break her back, but only after reducing her to helpless terror. Such was his horrible nature. Now run, little lady, he ordered. Run between my paws. With pleasure, said Miss Bianca. She darted gracefully to and fro. Touch and touch again, she cried. What shall we do next? Mamluk looked at her with renewed astonishment. She was the first mouse he had seen in years, for he had come to the castle when only half grown. Yet he couldn't believe his memory played him so false, that this was the usual way for a mouse to behave. A lady of spirit, I see, he growled. All the more sport, then, before the end. This is what we do next, my love. He flashed out his paw again and pinned Miss Bianca to the floor. She lay absolutely helpless, not an inch from his jaws, under a weight like a mattress stuffed with lead. What beautiful eyes you have, observed Miss Bianca. They remind me so much of a friend's. Were you ever in Persia? No, I was not, shouted Mamma. And this is what we do afterwards, he shouted, with one movement scooping her up and flipping her through the air. From his point of view, it was a mistake. Miss Bianca landed quite safe, if a little breathless, in the long hair of his back, where he couldn't immediately get at her. Hide and seek, cried Miss Bianca delightedly, and ran deeper in. Oh, goodness. By this time, Mamluke was so baffled and so angry he would have made one mouthful of Miss Bianca there and then, if he could have got at her. But he couldn't. He rolled and shook himself, then leaped and galloped, but he couldn't shake Miss Bianca off. She nestled deep in his long, thick coat and clung on tighter and tighter, emitting little squeals of pleasure. I know it's a common taste, cried Miss Bianca, but how I do enjoy a switchback. It was Mameluke who tried first, flinging himself down before the stove, quite worn out. Miss Bianca's voice next came from somewhere near the root of his tail. I'm sorry to tell you, she called kindly, but your coat needs a great deal of attention. When were you last brushed? Mumlik began to swear, using really the most dreadful language. But fortunately, Miss Bianca couldn't quite hear. She just gathered that he was annoyed and made haste to soothe him. Now, don't get into a pet, she begged. I'm only speaking for your own good. Cats aren't brushed, shouted Mumlik. Oh, indeed they are, retorted Miss Bianca positively. My friend often told me how uncomfortable it was if his page missed even one morning. And what's this? She cried, really distressed. This dreadful matted patch. Probably blood, shouted Momlik. Mouse blood. No, it isn't, said Miss Bianca. It's treacle. Really, what carelessness. But at least I can get that out for you, if you'll only hold still. Mameluke held still. He was too exhausted to do anything else. Miss Bianca nibbled and nibbled, and at last nibbled the treacle path clear. Treacle patch clear. But it wasn't only treacle. It was a tiny scrap of cloth, stuck with treacle to Mameluke's fur, and with writing upon it. Do see about your brushing tomorrow, said Miss Bianca hastily. Now, forgive me if I run. Mameluke had actually fallen asleep. Bernard and Nils, rushing in at the sitting-room door, could streak straight across to join Miss Bianca in their hole. Are you safe? Panted Bernard. Of course I'm safe, said Miss Bianca. And just look at this. Chapter 10. The Message. They had to scrape and lick till their tongues felt like emery paper, being careful all the time not to scrape or lick away any writing. Mamlu was right in one respect. The message, for such it was written in blood from a pricked finger. At last the treacle was cleaned off, and there, quite clear upon the poor scrap of rag, showed 3 or 4 words in an educated hand. And in Norwegian, shouted Nils. He pushed Bernard roughly aside to see better. Bernard didn't mind. What does it say? Cried Miss Bianca. They had never before seen Nils overcome by emotion. Now he actually used the precious rag to wipe his eyes. For goodness sakes, don't wash anything off, cried Bernard, offering his own spotted handkerchief. Just tell us what it says. Nils gulped and controlled himself. It says, well, roughly it just says, shall I ever see Norway again? For a moment, at these pathetic words, all fell silent. Then, but at least he's still alive, exclaimed Miss Bianca. It was wonderful what a difference the knowledge made. Each mouse felt a fresh surge of hope and energy, discussing the matter among themselves, as they did for hours and hours. They decided that the prisoner must have prepared the message in advance and seized an opportunity when Mamluk jumped down into the dungeon to stick it to his fur. However despairing, then, the poor poet, besides being still alive, was still capable of resource. And how much more should they be, at liberty, at least within the castle? We've been idling, cried Nils. We haven't been using our heads. This wasn't strictly fair, but both Bernard and Miss Bianca understood what he meant. While they didn't know the prisoner was there to be rescued, they had gradually let hopelessness get the better of them and lived from day to day, waiting on events. I shall explore the castle more thoroughly, said Nils, wiping his eyes for the last time. There must be some way out besides the gate. I've just been sitting on the ledge like a stuffed owl. I shall make a timetable, said Bernard, of exactly when the jailers go their rounds and exactly when they unlock the dungeon corridor. And I, said Miss Bianca, shall talk to Mameluke. The other two at once stopped making their own plans to argue with her. Even Nils now realized what risk she had just run. And as for Bernard, he could hardly trust himself to speak moderately. Don't think of it, Miss Bianca, he begged. Wonderfully as things have turned out, do please believe it's an even greater wonder you're not eaten up this minute. No mouse on earth could talk to Mamluk twice and live to tell the tale. Why he didn't eat you. Miss Bianca looked down at her fan. I think I fascinate him, she said simply. You may be perfectly right. Perhaps he does mean to eat me. Oh dear, sighed Miss Bianca in parentheses. How very different in nature in that case from my poor friends. But he didn't, you know. His expression, as I ran between his paws, was really quite fascinated. I'm sure he wants to meet me again, if only from dishonorable motives. Let me engage him in conversation, and guide it into the right channels, and what may I not learn to our advantage? For if anyone knows everything that goes on in the castle, said Miss Bianca, it's Mamluk. Bernard and Nils couldn't deny it. But the danger, cried Bernard nonetheless. You and Nils make your plans, said Miss Bianca gently. Aren't they dangerous too? You have strength and agility. She looked modestly down again, have only charm. You must allow me to employ it. Now good night, dear friends, and in the morning to our tasks. She carried the prisoner's message to bed with her and placed it tenderly under her pillow. Before they all fell asleep, a short conversation took place in the room shared by Nils and Bernard. Nils, said Bernard. Said Nils sleepily. Who called Miss Bianca a bit of a nuisance? There was a slight pause. I ought to be kicked, said Nils. If you like, you can come and kick me now. That's all right, said Bernard. Good night. 2. Now all was action and enthusiasm again. Nils and Bernard returned to exploring the castle, Nils on the outside, Bernard within. They left Miss Bianca alone as a matter of course. Nils ran about the great walls, utilizing every nook and cranny, while Bernard, even more daringly, slipped to and fro at the jailer's heels, noting and memorizing their every movement. Miss Bianca deliberately threw herself in Mamluk's way, and this was useful to the other two as well, since she kept him fixed in the sitting room for long periods at a time. Mameluke couldn't tear himself away from her. It is hard to speak too highly of Miss Bianca's courage. Shot with vanity though it might be, her gaiety and wit fascinated Mamluk completely. At the same time, as she came to know him better, she recognized him to be just as cruel and wicked as Bernard said. He did indeed mean to eat her up. He as good as told her so. "Can you really be as sweet as you look, little lady?" Mamluk would purr, with horrible double meaning. "I wonder what's the way to find out." Then it was always just one more game, or one last game, "to give me an appetite for my dinner," purred Mamluk. Miss Bianca's nerves were so taut she had to go and lie down as soon as she regained the hole. But she always did regain it, always at the last moment by some exquisite trick or clever piece of flattery. She held Mamluk's paw suspended and then skimmed like a hummingbird to safety. Unluckily, when Mamluk felt like conversation, it was mostly about himself, and Miss Bianca grew very tired of hearing what a handsome kitten he had been, and what an enormous sum the head jailer had paid for him, and how even dogs, in the days when he was out in the world, used to howl for mercy at the sight of him. Besides all his other vices, he was a shocking liar. One piece of information, however, she did gather, which she hoped might be highly important. Every New Year's Eve, all the jailers in the castle, including the head, held a midnight feast. From midnight till dawn, not a single one was on duty. "And not next morning either," leered Mamluk. "Indeed? Why is that?" asked Miss Bianca. "They've all got bilious attacks," leered Mamluk. "They stuff themselves so. One's supposed to be on duty, the one who takes the prisoners their grub, but it's all he can do to stagger." Miss Bianca's heart beat with excitement, but she kept her wits. "And do you have a bilious attack too?" she inquired solicitously. "Not me," swaggered Mamluk. "I attend, of course, to prevent disappointment, and I eat everything going. But the feast hasn't been spread yet that could upset my stomach. I am Mameluke the Iron-Tummed." But when Miss Bianca made her report to Nils and Bernard, she added that she was sure he was lying again. "He protested too much," she explained. "I remember a child at one of the boys' birthday parties who said the same sort of thing, until a footman carried him out. In my opinion, Mamluk won't be on duty either." "Which means," said Bernard eagerly, "that on that morning, the morning of New Year's Day—" "We can get into the dungeon corridor," shouted Nils, "all of us, and down through the grid, for a mouse can pass where a food pan can't. We may reach the prisoner at last." "But as to getting him out," said Bernard, more soberly, "we're much where we were. A man can't pass where a mouse can, and even if he could, he'd still be inside the castle. The gate won't open till next autumn, and we could never hide the prisoner until then." "At least Nils can speak to him in Norwegian," said Miss Bianca, "and keep his spirits up. Nils can call a few words of Norwegian through each grid, like Blondel and Richard the First, and as soon as he gets an answer—" "Down or jump," promised Nils. "But in the meantime," he added, "how long is it to New Year's Eve?" Bernard ran out and looked at the head jailer's calendar. 3 days, he reported back. In the meantime, said Nils stoutly, I shall go on exploring. They then passed a vote of thanks to Miss Bianca and retired for the night. None of them slept much, however, partly through excitement and partly because there was another thunderstorm. The thunderstorms at this time were more furious than ever. So was the river more furious than ever, lashing and beating between its banks like a captive dragon. Even up in their hole the mice could hear its voice, ever present between the thunderclaps, and almost more alarming in its steady, thwarted rage. Yet the river was to prove their best, if erratic, friend. 3. 2 days passed in feverish yet unrewarded activity. Bernard gave up making timetables and explored with Nils. They discovered several fresh cracks and crannies. What a buffeting the castle had taken, but none of any use to a man-sized prisoner. Then at last, very early after the worst night of all, "Come quick!" cried Nils, pulling the pillow off Bernard's head. To Bernard's surprise, Nils had evidently been out already. His fur was damp and staring from the morning air. "What, before breakfast?" mumbled Bernard. He was still only half awake. "Bother breakfast!" cried Nils. "Come on!" He was away before you could say knife, and now Bernard leaped up and followed. Together they ran recklessly across the sitting room, out into the corridor, up through the bars of the corridor window, and then down, down, down the castle walls to a little boss of rock out jutting from the cliff itself. The last of the gale almost whipped them off their feet. Below snarled the still angry river, tossing and turning in its bed. "See anything different?" asked Nils excitedly. Bernard leaned so far over, Nils had to hold him by the tail. He gazed with all his eyes. There was something different, though at first he couldn't make out what. Then he discerned at the very foot of the cliff, where once rock rose sheer from the water, a great jumbled heap of stones. "The castle's crumbling!" cried Bernard. "Not the castle," corrected Nils, hauling him back. "It's too solid, but there was just one weak spot, as the rivers found out. Look at those stones, cut stones. Look at those steps. Do you know what I think's down there?" "Go on, tell me," implored Bernard. "An old water gate," said Nils. "Sometime down there's been a water gate. Stands to reason. No one ever built this castle just for a prison," said Nils positively. "In its time, it must have been an honest castle with, stands to reason, a water gate. Then it was blocked up, and now the river's worried it free again, like worrying the stopping out of a tooth. So there is another way out." For a moment, they gave themselves up to happy excitement, Bernard congratulating Nils and slapping him on the back. Nils flourishing his whiskers in honest self-approval. Then Bernard looked over the edge again. "I wonder what part of the castle it leads to," he said practically, "and if it's unblocked all the way." "That we must find out," said Nils. "Come on."